So a little bit about me. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Information and Communication Studies, and I was writing about drone warfare and the morals of video game killing a decade before it actually became mainstream, which is kind of fun. I have my Master's in Business Administration from the University of New Brunswick as well, and I focus on technology and strategy. And I joke that I get my undergraduate in cybercrime over the last 3 years in my current role with ITS. A little bit about the University of New Brunswick. Of course, we love to have our qualifier. We're the oldest English language public university in North America. Notice all the little qualifiers in there. Founded in 1785. 2 main campuses, Fredericton, New Brunswick, and of course our youngest and growing campus in St. John, New Brunswick, with satellite programs for nursing in Bathurst and Moncton. Approximately 14,000 students. Now it depends on how you count students and all kinds of fun stuff. We had the first faculty of computer science in Canada, and we've got the Information Security Center of Excellence run by Ali Gourbani, and some phenomenal research happening there around cybersecurity. And believe it or not, we're actually the birthplace of the QRadar SIEM. For those not familiar with the acronym, Security Intelligence Event Monitoring, now it's the new sexiest security analytics. It's sort of an addictive little thing. I feel like the Matrix sometimes. I just watch all the flows streaming by, and every now and then I start reading stuff and I go, oh crap, that's not good. So we was actually built by the IT department. The funny backstory was it was this massive worm that was going through residents, and it was just bringing down the network, just crippling them, and they were just going psychotic looking at logs, and they said there's got to be a better way to correlate and do this, and so that's how it got started. So universities are the perfect breeding ground for cybersecurity products. So why is the University of New Brunswick, and why are all of your educational institutions, particularly higher education, a target? First of all, data is the new currency. A personal record sells in the black market for $10 to $15, depending on the day. It's very much a supply and demand market. If there's a big breach and there's more supply than particular demand, it can fluctuate the prices, but on average, $10 to $15. Fascinatingly, a credit card only sells for $1 now. Well, why does personal information sell for 10 to 15 times a credit card? Because it's persistent, because you can create long-term credit files. And the funny thing is, for the individual, if you do get thoroughly owned by a credit compromise, it can cost on average between $4,000 to $5,000 to clean up. It's insane. So we're a digital bank. We have 500,000 detailed records, names, addresses, birth dates, sometimes employment history, what we call what's called in the underground a fulls. That's worth approximately $5 to $7.5 million to somebody if they steal it. Interestingly enough, if we do have a catastrophic breach of that nature, it causes us as much as 10 times the damage in both cost, cash cost, as well as reputational cost on average for a breach. So first of all, when it comes to crime, and 80% of the activity, according to a new IBM report that we see with respect to hacking and malware, is organized crime. So that's number one. Secondly, valuable intellectual property. Again, research folks and higher ed in particular, we produce millions of dollars worth of IP. We've contributed to Google's mapping technology. We've developed all kinds of fun stuff that we obviously try and monetize for the benefit of our province. We conduct 80% of the public research in New Brunswick. Of course, this is of high interest, particularly to certain governments overseas in Southeast Asia that love to base their economic 5-year plans on what they can steal. For those of you who aren't familiar, the National Research Council lost billions of dollars of your taxpayer-funded research to one of those attacks. Access to third-party confidential information. If you want to attack a Boeing, if you want to attack a federal government, you do not go at them directly. You find all your university partners and you go after them. So, for example, a lot of people don't know that Calpine Corporation, a major U.S. energy company with plants in Canada and the U.S., had a complete list of its blueprints, other SCADA information, sometimes even passwords, all compromised, and it happened because one of their university partners was attacked. Our infrastructure can be used to attack others. The amount of emails, this is funny, it was a year into the job, and I got my first call from the secretary, and they said, hey, I got a call from the FBI. University of New Brunswick. Someone's just pulling my leg, right? A year into this. No, it was legit. And it had to do with folks who were spoofing our email to send them very unique malware to try and breach into the FBI. We had to show them how to read an SPF record so that actually no, it wasn't coming from us, but it was an interesting phone call. Other times, our infrastructure, particularly CS breachers, are bad for this. They'll spin up some Linux infrastructure, they'll leave it alone for 2 years, not patch it. A Chinese crew with a Romanian proxy comes in, grabs it, uses it to attack Berkeley. Berkeley sends me a nasty email. We knock it off, all kinds of fun stuff. And finally, we're easy. Let's be honest, particularly in higher education, culturally, we have not kept up with what's happened in the criminal underground. I had a long conversation with a researcher who thought it was absolutely scandalous that we're doing any kind of filtering of websites. We were filtering phishing websites, particularly Wix.com, Webs.com. A lot of these places use to harvest credentials. And I was trying to explain to him, he's like, well, that'd be like blocking books in the library. I said, well, if I was to take your analogy, it's actually like blocking a book that you opened, it would infect you with Ebola. So yeah, there's a legitimate case for some of this stuff. But culturally, we haven't kept up, and it's expensive. It's expensive in time, staff, resources, and technologies. There are no silver bullets, and it's not cheap when you do need these layered technologies. And that's hard in a public sector environment right now, where you're looking at, in my case, a 5 to 7% budget cut this year. So a little bit about the numbers. We have 83 to 145 attempts per second. This goes back to what Ted was talking about. This is just banging on the door. And it becomes, to use Dave Mason's mathematical model, it's just a probability exercise of when they're going to get in. And so, we have some networks where it took up to 2 years for me to finally teach people that allowing inbound remote desktop access to all of our desktops, regardless of where they are, HR, finance, was a bad idea. Finally got to, we firewall rules, right? Finally got that locked down, but our researchers in CS absolutely couldn't have that. They have to have remote access in. So you wouldn't believe the amount of stuff that comes from China beating at the door. 60 to 80 faculty and staff computers infected with serious malware on any given month. And this is not, candy adware. Some of this stuff is ransomware. Some of this stuff is remote access tools, data exfiltration. I remember one, it was a researcher. She had work with the police departments with homicide files with some aggregated data, used the same computer for the research as she did for accessing email and the internet. And of course, what a surprise, there was a compromise. Luckily, we were able to prove with the tools that we had there was no data exfiltration, but that was just one example of the kind of issues we've seen. We've lost 10,000 records in the last 12 months due to actually device thefts. So unencrypted faculty staff machines, sometimes with multiple years worth of student information on them, stolen, awkward sort of disclosures. We aren't actually mandated to, no university is actually required to report breaches. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and we talk to our privacy commissioner provincially about it. We had our environmental health and safety office. They were actually very diligent about encrypting stuff, but it was heading to the Christmas holidays. They had a Mac. They just moved the date over. They were just about to turn File Vault on, and come on, it's the holidays. It's locked up behind the door, no big deal. Of course, the Mac gets stolen. They command a particular premium, and the data is potentially out there. Phishing loss. We lost a 5-figure loss due to what they call a whaling attack. For those who aren't familiar, this is a new class of phishing that targets the CEOs, CFOs, accounting departments, etc. I was feeling kind of sore about this loss because I thought, wow, this was a spoofed email from a Hotmail, and damn, this just exploited electronic systems and bad financial processes, until I heard about a European aerospace firm that lost 50 million euros to the same scam. I didn't feel so bad. The FBI estimates $1.2 billion was lost in North America alone due to these scams. And 300 significant incidents every year they investigate, so I've had lots of hands-on learning. What's it like for higher education in North America? So 2014 was a bad year. It continued on into 2015. So University of Maryland lost 300,000 detailed records in one breach in 2014. North Dakota University, 300,000 records. For those keeping track, again, add the money, there's significant value to these breaches. Butler University lost 200,000 records. The interesting thing about the US is they estimate 1 in 3 American citizens has their health records breached now. 1 in 3. Interesting enough, health records sell for $60. I was having a drink with a company in Las Vegas that does medical records, And their poor CISO, he's got 14 million medical records that he has to look after for, and the guy, he has some sleepless nights. Rutgers University, this is really interesting. And so they had a series of DDoS attacks. For those who aren't familiar, denial of service or dedicated denial of service. Started in November 2014, 6 different attacks now that have completely crippled their infrastructure. Particularly, they use a tool called Sakai for their online learning course delivery system. And it basically has knocked that out, knocked their Wi-Fi out, all kinds of fun stuff. Apparently, someone had a bone to pick with them, so they hired a hacker, paid them in bitcoins, about $500 a day, to put them offline. And Xfocus apparently had an 85,000 device botnet. By the way, these botnets are rentable for any variety of prices. I priced one in the Canadian black market from it was a Trend Micro report. I think it worked out to about $60 if you wanted to put somebody off for 900 seconds. We've seen other examples of that. They were able to generate up to 25 gigabits per second, which is actually a small to medium size DDoS. And a lot of these are compromised routers, home routers that don't get patched, all kinds of fun stuff. The school has implemented a $3 million crash security program, brought in a ton of vendors, had to raise tuition 2.3% to address it. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Interestingly enough, and this is across all different sectors, the average damage per hour for a DDoS attack is about $40,000 an hour, and this is more applicable, say, to online retailers, etc. It is applicable to universities and others, particularly those that rely on tuition, because if they hit you during your prime online application seasons, you're losing revenue. People will go to other schools and apply. They may not come back. So there is a significant threat from these, and it is a monetizable thing. They'll send you a little ransom note sometimes to say, hey, $500, this can all go away. Penn State University, so they get a call from the FBI in November 2014, says, you're owned completely. They launch a comprehensive investigation, variety of firms. It was a 2-year compromise, went back to as far back as September 2012. They had to burn down their entire engineering school network. Everything had to go, rebuild it all. That's how deep the compromise was. They actually discovered their liberal arts college was just as bad once they started digging into it. And that's the thing about, honestly, cybersecurity in higher education. Once you start looking, you'll see it all. And it's a question of how bad and how much can you get to. Fascinatingly enough, the solutions for some of these problems are not complex. They are culturally complex, they are politically complex, they are technologically not that complex, relatively speaking. 2-factor authentication now rolling out. Huge win for them. University of California, Berkeley. So they had an attack in December 2015 against their financial systems. Approximately 50% of all their current student records were exfiltrated. 65% of current employees. They were actually exploited a vulnerability. They were just getting around to patching it, and they got hit. A funny thing was, the breach was coming after faculty protests of enhanced network monitoring. They had actually suffered a breach the year before. Janet DiPalatino, the former Department of Homeland Security secretary, is actually their president. And so she's pushing for these cybersecurity reforms. Of course, Berkeley is famous for liberal arts, academic freedom, etc. And they were very concerned about what kind of visibility they had and what the justification was. Well, there you go, another breach. So, what are the University of New Brunswick's security challenges when it comes to cyber? So here are some notable incidents for us, and this is fully sharing, and we've been very transparent the last couple of years. We don't believe in hiding behind any of this stuff. We believe it's important to talk about it publicly, because it allows the public to realize that when we suffer a breach, and we will, that this isn't a surprise. It's, of course, they were breached. They're attacked all the time. They're doing the best they can. It is, frankly, just being honest and transparent. It helps the community. It's helping our province understand the scale of the threats we're seeing. So 2012, this is actually where my journey started with the University of New Brunswick. I was working in the communications and marketing department. I brought over from, I was actually a journalist, crime reporter for the New Brunswick Telegraph-Journal, business and politics. It's funny, business, politics, and crime actually have a lot in common. So I was actually, woke up one morning, got an email from this group called Team Digital, said, we owned you, and here's the paste bin. Okay, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning, take my Greyhound out for the usual washroom break, went through the paste bin and said, oh, yep, they did. Thank God it was not the enterprise resource system or the student information system. It was not a Berkeley breach. It was a breach of non-public information, budget information, etc., some co-op databases. The reason they got in is they had an old part of our website built by a student. We weren't paying attention to it. Simple SQL injection attack, and they were able to exfiltrate databases from it. Woke up, I called the IT folks who I worked with very closely, said, you've got a problem, let's deal with it together. Spent the day, it was Mother's Day, and that was a real learning opportunity for us. And right off the bat, I worked very close with the CIO to own it. It was on Twitter, it was public. We were very transparent about what happened, what we were doing about it, that it was a learning opportunity for us. Funny thing is, the team that hacked us, Team Digital, the leader of it was actually a systems administrator for a nuclear reactor on a U.S. aircraft carrier. He was hacking us from the carrier. He got caught by NCIS, which is the first time I actually have seen NCIS outside of the TV show. So I thought that was really cool. They hacked us, Harvard, the National Film Board. I thought of all the people to hack, right? National Film Board. God, it's the worst thing they've done, the Bad Heritage Minute, but go figure. 2013, and this was a really interesting year. So phishing attacks captured, and these guys were smart. They were from Southeast Asia. They harvested a series of credentials for fact staff, and they waited till 2 o'clock in the morning. By the way, these cats, they read your email notices, your IT advisories. They know what time you go to bed. Logged in with the credentials. At the time, our infrastructure didn't have much limits, so they puked out 1 million spam, which for those who have had their email systems compromised, when you do that, folks like Hotmail, Google, Sorbs, they put you on blacklists, and all of a sudden, email is gone. Do you want to see a university freak out? Take away email for 2 days and inability to send to critical folks. So that was a really interesting lesson learned. Key thing there, never waste a crisis. So we were able to actually impose email limiting. So there's only a certain amount of email you can send per day before our system actually stops you and says, hey, what are you up to? Which is great because it put us ahead of the curve in terms of CASL compliance and everything else. 2013, we had our first experience of a cloud provider breach. So we had a cloud provider for our ticketing system for our athletic center. They get breached in, I believe it was March. They didn't tell us till May. They told a bunch of other people, including the FBI. The lesson learned from that was have your digital sharing agreements, data sharing agreements in place for breach notification. Make sure that whoever's providing you services, whether it's SaaS, software as a service in this case, platform or infrastructure, when they do suffer a breach, and they may, they actually have obligations. We ended up into a hilarious conversation about who was supposed to notify the thousands of credit card customers as to that their credit card number has been breached and they need to get a new credit card. Lessons learned. 2014 DDoS attack. So all of a sudden, it was an evening, our network just gets blitzed. We can't figure out what's going on. Turns out it was because at the time, residence users were on our network and we had one of North America's top Xbox gamers. And he was rising in the ranks of Call of Duty, and he had actually pissed off 2 kids in the Ontario region, one in Ottawa, one in the GTA, one in the Midwest US. He videotaped his games. So we watched the whole conversation. The first thing they did is they threatened to SWAT him, which is where they're able to look up his IP because our bad, we use Class B IP, so it's all public. So I knew exactly he was on the campus. The kid had given enough information just in the course of the conversation. They knew enough about him to threaten this. They didn't do that. They tried to boot him off, and to our firewall's credit, the initial attacks, that normally would knock off an ADSL router, didn't really do anything. So they went and rented themselves a Russian botnet, about 50,000 computers, and 15 minutes later, we're off the internet. And it's hard to explain to your university president that your campus is out of business in the evenings, particularly no student access to library resources, etc., because of an Xbox gamer. This is a great example of a non-technology-based solution to a cybersecurity risk. We call it risk transfer. So now they're all on Bell Alliance network. Fantastic. I didn't want to have students on our network anyway because 86% of our malware, thanks to tools like Deep Discovery from Trend Micro and IBM's QRadar, I could generate these great statistics and say, look, we can reduce our risk by 86% just by getting rid of it. So that's why on my LinkedIn profile it says reduce UNB's risk by 86%. I've had all kinds of wins because of that. Huge increase in malware, 2014 to 2015, just across the board. Now, part of this is because we're looking more. I acknowledge that. but part of it is just a surge. Last 2 weeks alone, last conference I was at, Calgary last week, I was making jokes about this surge in word-based macro malware. It's back. I mean, macro malware, as the 90s called. And I think, who the hell is dumb enough to click on it, open an email attachment, enable the macro? So 15 minutes after I gave the speech, I had 2 calls. So I had 2 folks at our work who did it. Oh, awesome. One of them, God love her, she thought she was doing the right thing. She had all her files on a USB key. She kept it securely locked up. Well, she had macros enabled, opened the email invoice. She didn't expect to get an invoice. She was curious about what the invoice was. Of course, it was the locky malware. She put her USB key in, and it locked her USB key, and we're pretty sure we can't get it back. Happened to another folk in our facilities management group, and they deal with asbestos data. Thank God they backed their stuff up to the network, and it didn't encrypt the network drive. We've had other incidences where different malware has encrypted network drives, and you basically tell the department, your day's work, forget it, we're rolling back to backup. Please don't pay the ransom. That doesn't do good for the rest of us. Laptop thefts result in the loss of thousands of records. And, those are always fun because you get these awkward conversations. Was it encrypted? No. Why? We don't force enterprise encryption. We're trying to change that. We get these nice little notices from the privacy commissioner. This would be a really good idea. Good times. So some interesting stats. These are pulled actually from Deep Discovery. So a fun little thing. 4,700 devices on our network visited malicious websites, so that's students, faculty, and staff. Now, a malicious website may be actually bad, kick-ass torrents, Pirate Bay, etc. About half of the BitTorrent sites out there, by the way, will infect you. What a surprise. People that steal from Hollywood want to steal from you. But other times, it's the Globe and Mail. It's a compromised advertising network. It's all kinds of fun stuff. So it's not always just strictly visiting bad things. The vast majority of our malware is drive-by downloads. So interesting, a lot of folks don't patch their Adobe Reader. And they ask me, what the hell does that have to do with getting infected to my computer? It's because, well, Adobe has a plugin on your browser. Your browser visits an infected website. The malware checks and says, this version of Adobe, this exploit, here you go. Here's some ransomware or some other things. The other thing I've learned about malware is it's like a college dorm room party. Like, one comes in, and then it's just like a whole load of people just pile in there, and you're just, it's fun. And then you just watch, and you see, look at all this data going to Russia. 1 in 4 malware incidents in UNB contain remote access tools, so those are a lot of fun. So the cost of malware cleanup, I'm a numbers guy, so there's, I guess, the MBA obsession with trying to calculate and analyze things. So we deal with about 300 infections per year that bypass AV protection. That's what we can deal with. Realistically, we have about 12 to 1,400 infections that we can't deal with in as timely a fashion and that get remediated by the user, etc. The lost productivity just on those 300 alone is about $24,000, and that equals about 2 hours per incident on average, and we're pretty quick at this. We've got a defined process to clean it up. About $40 an hour in the cost. So if we were actually to deal with the whole ream of malware infections we're seeing right now manually, it's about $175,000 a year. It's not cheap. Our current security architecture, so no IDS, IDP, no web content filtering. We're just asking for it, right? Endpoint antivirus is not integrated with our other security tools, and this is just causing us a ton of manual work. And the future is your tools have to be integrated. We have outdated Mac-based network access control for wired connections, 802.1x for wireless, that's good, but our NAC process is highly manual and we want to quarantine, and it's too slow. So we need to look at better solutions for dealing with that. So we have a new approach to security. Now, first of all, the first priority is not technology. Ted nailed it when he said there's no silver bullet. There's not a silver bullet. But there are 4 key pillars to fixing things. The first one goes right to the heart of it. It's culture. So the IT security policy is not another acceptable use policy, thou shall not, thou shall, blah, blah, blah. No, this is about teaching people throughout the organization, from employees to supervisors, managers, deans, directors, vice presidents, presidents, you're part of our security response. Your responsibilities include how you treat data, when something bad happens, being actively involved in reporting and remediating it and dealing with it, being part of the process. It's setting the culture and the expectations. Yes, we're attacked all the time. We're going to be attacked, and sometimes they're going to beat us. It's just a numbers thing. So that's the IT security policy. That's a big culture change for us. And it, I think we're on draft 7, 8, 9 of that particular document. Data governance. Not sexy. I mean, my eyes go cross-eyed most good days anyway, but looking at some of this stuff, it's dry, but it is so fundamentally critical to actually being secure. If you don't even know what data you have, how the hell am I supposed to protect it? So if we don't know where our records are, if we don't know what we have that's prohibited, that we shouldn't be having, if we didn't know that someone was sending credit card numbers by email for that conference, happens, that type of stuff. So actually getting people, and you don't have to figure it all out at once. In fact, very few organizations can. I talked to a very smart organization in the financial services industry, and the way that they tackled it, they started with very big buckets. And helping people start to sort and organize this stuff out. It is a very long journey, but it is as critical as the security culture policy change, data governance. Then, of course, we're into the overhaul of our network and security architecture. So next generation firewalls, new anti-malware, better endpoint protection, with a vision for integration, network access control. This is a 2 to 3 year program. At least $2 million in cost for us, likely. It should cost us a lot more, but we're being very creative about that. And a year-long persistent cybersecurity awareness campaign. This is my bread and butter. I live this every day. We send out emails. We had posters throughout our student union building. We've got a number of other communications tactics, what we would call an integrated marketing communications campaign, all designed to attack the root of most security breaches, which is people. 90% of the FBI's major investigations, I had a chance to talk to one of their lead investigators in Vancouver, it always starts with social engineering. It's the little phishing email that could. I heard the joke once, it was like, give a man a 0 day and he's in your network for 1 day, teach a man to fish and he's in your network forever. We use a great platform called FishMe. I've been fishing our own faculty and staff for 6 months. I can tell you the bare bones, your inbox is full will get 1 in 10 of your employees. Interesting fun fact of that 1 in 10, say you get 100, so you got 10, 5 of those 10 employees who respond will do so in the first 60 minutes. There are very few organizations in higher education or education in general that have a persistent 24-hour security team, and there are very few, even if it happens during business hours, who can respond in 60 minutes. These cats know that. Even more sophisticated ones, I've been able to get higher rates than 1 in 10. So I love hearing Darktrace and others, IBM's is adopting a similar model. Others are using this language now. It's absolutely correct. It's the digital immune system, enterprise immune system model. And it's not to say, as Dave was saying, that some security tools are obsolete, unnecessary, forget about it, etc. They have a role, just like he said, the skin has a role in keeping out. We take for granted how much crap the skin keeps out, but it's not enough. And so the reality is we start with people. We do not, nor will we ever have the people to keep up with the scale of threats we're seeing. We need automated solutions. We need these things to work together. Our tools have to do threat detection, prevention, isolation, and remediation. I know it's been talked about for years. We are absolutely focused on trying to actually achieve it. I met with a very large networking company in San Francisco, and their security team is amazing. And I had a chance to sit down and talk to them, and they've got automated processes for dealing with malware that are phenomenal. And basically, it's a commodity issue for them. It's not the end of the world. It's not all hands on deck. It happens, and they deal with it, and it's great. I was impressed. Our security architecture vision includes network access control. We love our acronyms, NAC, NGFW, SEAMS. So it's got all that in it. And our security responsibilities are increasing because the reality is schools are partnering together. In New Brunswick, our fiscal context is such our provincial government is very big on shared services. So the University of New Brunswick, we're a small kid compared to some of you big Ontario schools, but we're the big kid in our little pond. And we just finished a data center reno, and we're trying to figure out how we can offer services, particularly as an educational environment with some of the advantages we have with pricing, et cetera, to other schools, how we can do group buys, infrastructure as a service. We have common federated identity among a bunch of universities, shared SharePoint, et cetera. So here's what it looks like in practice. So at the center, we've got QRadar as a SIEM, which, again, because we invented it, we're blessed to have. Not all schools are lucky enough to have a SIEM, but if you can, it's the first place to start. If you don't have visibility, and regardless of the tool, it doesn't matter. If you don't understand what's happening in your network, it doesn't matter. You need to start there. Visibility is the first part of figuring out what are my biggest problems and what am I going to tackle with. Next, of course, we got network malware detection, and I have found that regardless of which technology approach, whether it's integrated into MGFW, a standalone tool, whatever, having that second pass where malware can't or doesn't know that it's being watched, and so this includes sandboxing technology, etc., it gives you some really fantastic insight into what's happening on your network that the endpoints just aren't always seeing. So it's critical. Endpoint protection, and that includes more than just traditional AV. Sometimes you're talking about some forensics tools, and you don't have to deploy this to every single device, but folks who have access to your entire student record system might be a good idea to be able to have these kind of tools to see what happened and quickly diagnose a breach. There are interesting changes happening on the legislation federally that apply to federally regulated industries that are going to require this kind of insight to quickly diagnosing a breach. Network access control and firewalls, all working together and not just sending data to the SIEM, because reality is, we see 500 to 1,000 offenses a week, and we're not staffed to deal with that. I remember talking someone, they said the average energy company might have 5 operators, and they might deal with 50 offenses a week. We've got one maybe person that looks at this every day, so we can't keep up with it that way. This is modernizing our QRadar. So we've been able to virtualize almost all of our QRadar infrastructure, which again takes advantage of the scale. We're 80 to 90% virtualized anyway, using VMware infrastructure. Our plan, so the ECN stands for the Educational Compute Network. That's kind of New Brunswick's ORAN. Well, it is New Brunswick ORAN, kind of like Orion, but not nearly as advanced as some of the stuff you guys have here. We have the internet services that we manage. They're run through Rogers. So we've got these internet routers. And then, of course, our eventual plan is to tap our canary, because 50 to 60% of our traffic flows over the canary links now, and we're not monitoring those as much as we should. That includes peering service. The amount of malware now that uses Google Drive to execute or do stuff, or Microsoft's OneDrive, which is running through peering, it'd be good to know what's going on there. And it's funny because we had an attack came over Internet 2 from the University of Michigan. It was a security researcher there. Came over Internet 2 via Canary, hit us. I didn't see it in QRadar, but Deep Discovery picked it up because the series of network exploits just pinged off on its detection. And I was like, what the hell is this? And it turned out to be a guy, doing research. So this is our modernization plan. We just got the vulnerability manager up and running, and oh, what a hoot. So we ran it against our research network, and let's just say hundreds of critical vulnerabilities. What's really going to be fun is when I can assign each researcher's server to their name, and it's just going to automatically email them. Hey, fix this. It's great. Again, speed of response. We are hoping that with next generation firewall capabilities, to the point about encrypted traffic, that for certain sensitive networks, we will get better visibility because more and more malware is encrypting. So you do have to pay attention to that stuff. So our hybrid cloud, present, future, I know there's a lot of acronyms, and Ted was teasing me last night about cloud and what does that mean depending on the perspective. Someone once told me cloud is basically someone else's computer. Yeah, fair enough. Office 365 deployed to students, phenomenally successful. We cannot offer the email storage capability, features, et cetera, these cats that students expect. So that's been a huge win for us. We're going to be expanding that to faculty and staff as an opt-in process, which is going to create some new security challenges for us, but the opportunities are there. And obviously the cost savings of leveraging these larger infrastructure offerings are significant. We will be a multi-tenant data center, either as a disaster recovery for folks. There's a lot of interest. We just finished a $1.5 million reno. A lot of interest in shared co-location, either as infrastructure or platform or SaaS. A highly automated security infrastructure is critical for our security, and if we're going to offer this to others, we're going to have to meet certain security expectations, and those will be clarified via things like service level agreements, et cetera. Canadian hosted public cloud is going to be part of your future, regardless of the paranoia about data and stuff flowing over. People look at the cost and the features. It's going to be part of it. So it's coming. Montreal is going to have a new Amazon Web Services data center. Microsoft's got 2 spinning up in Canada. So how are we going to include those in our strategies? You know, higher education particularly is a very seasonal business. We see a lot of increase in workloads around, you know, September, people arrive, and, different research projects start and end. So cloud offers advantages of incremental cost. It's highly likely our future capacity needs are going to leverage this. This is going to create new security challenges. So our evolving approach. So a little bit about the Educational Computing Network, UNB, Mount Allison, University of Prince Edward Island, Maritime College of Forest Technology. Founded in 1970, it's been a phenomenally successful partnership, not just for network services, but for doing things like shared purchases, leveraging agreements with larger IT folks. We do a shared buy for our enterprise antivirus, for example. That's a little bit about our network map. A lot of our own fiber that we own, which obviously, again, when you're talking about being a private cloud provider to other universities, reduces the cost because we don't have the sort of transmission costs. And so we, on-premises combined with private cloud is the future for us. That's a picture of a data center. So fun story, data centers aren't that cool anymore in terms of there's not that many blinking lights. It's just basically a bunch of server racks that don't do much. So when we did our opening, we actually put some LED lights in. So we had a light switch for the president to throw. So we could actually say, it's on. This was a huge project for us. Our CIO is visionary. He saw the writing on the wall in terms of the need to not just modernize it because, having water dripping in your data center, not a good idea. So, the physical need for the safety, but also the visionary, how can we better cooperate with other universities, leverage this space, leverage virtualization technology. It's one of the reasons I love working at UNB. So we have shared services now. So we have common federated identity. You can log in at any ECN school. We have SharePoint. We do gateway anti-malware and spam filtering for email. Thank you. And security event monitoring. So why is it hard to secure higher education? Let's start with culture. Cybersecurity, if you think of it all, that's IT's problem. It's not. Security has to be baked into finance, HR, everybody's business processes. Complexity. Oh man, 2-factor authentication, are you kidding me? An extra 2 seconds? Oh, IT. But I mean, my God, you would solve so many breach problems with 2-factor. Not all of them, but a lot. Conflict of interest. A lot of IT departments are responsible for security. They're also told to save money. They're also told, don't inconvenience me. Those things don't align very well together. Cash. What a surprise, we're talking education. Cash is a problem. It's expensive. Some of the vendors' licensing models haven't been tuned for higher education. I had a really good conversation last night with somebody who did a phenomenal job negotiating on fixing some of that, the pricing with one particular vendor. Complacency. Either they don't see themselves as a target, we're a university, a high school, etc. Or if they do, they go, what are we going to do? They get into what I call the security valley of despair, and they decide doing nothing. Or my favorite video lately on YouTube is I Accept the Risk, where a supposed CISO, basically it's sung to, I think it's Because I Got High, that tune to that song, I accept the risk. We got hacked because I accept the risk. Too many times that's the default answer. So thank you for your attentiveness. I'm happy to take a few questions. I think I have a couple of minutes. I find it's a great way to win arguments with academics. Oh my God, data. Oh, data-driven decision-making. What a revolutionary idea, right? So you actually start to, you're not talking fear, uncertainty, doubt. You're talking probabilities, numbers, and it's actually something you can measure and say, look, we've improved this much. Other questions? Yeah.
With respect to your move to Office 365, is the opt-in for staff, is that due to some reservations on their part, or is it a capacity thing, or is it just a
yeah, it's a great question. It is actually has to do with a personal comfort level. And so we're acknowledging some folks aren't comfortable with having that stored there. Regardless of the great discussions, we can talk about the transmission and security of email, et cetera, but it's fine. And we have the capacity, we have the infrastructure to do it. So for those who want to take advantage. I was the first one in line. Actually, our biggest problem with faculty staff with moving their email to the cloud is we have a Cisco VoIP system, was voicemail. So that's our big challenge that we're actually in the process of solving this week. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, just one question. Yeah, how effective are you in protecting your databases? For example, data exfiltration is a big deal for everyone. What controls have you put in place?
Okay, so obviously the most critical data in any institution, in my view, is the Enterprise Resource Planning System, ERP, or the Student Information System. Sometimes they're combined into one. We have decent layers of defense and good hygiene on patching, security, network segmentation, all that type of stuff. And we do have monitoring for abnormal traffic, that type of jazz. But that's where we are today. One of the issues I have is you get an endpoint infected with malware, and you don't prevent people from exfiltrating, because we allow people to exfiltrate stuff as Excel files and manipulate the data, et cetera. This goes back to data governance. And then all of a sudden, and this actually happened. So we had somebody who was downloading BitTorrent movies at work because it was the holiday season. They were bored. They thought they got the Katy Perry movie. This a couple of years ago. They got the Zeus banking Trojan and had a whole bunch of friends. And luckily, it just stole $1,000 from their bank account. Actually, the funny part was I went and knocked on her door after our security tools lit up like a Christmas tree. Said, "Hey, you got a problem?" I said, "Oh, what is it?" "Well, you've got malware. Do you know anything suspicious with your bank accounts?" And she said, "Oh, that's why that 1,000 came out of checking." Yep. So luckily we didn't see any data come out of that, but that's my biggest risk. So we're thinking about things like how can we intelligently use VDI infrastructures and give people just enough access to those large data sets to do their jobs without allowing them to be the stepping stone via phishing, etc., for exfiltrating data. In the back.
Protecting the environment there. Does that extend into the cloud, public and private? So Azure, SoftLayer, things like that?
So that's the challenge that we've got to look into, is how are we going to do that increasingly as, for example, as faculty staff email goes to the cloud, we're going to be relying on Microsoft's anti-malware, anti-spam built-in defenses there. Is that good enough? Don't know. We're going to have to talk about it. But it is different than our on-prem defenses. So we're going to have a lot more thought and a lot more complexity comes into that. It gets really interesting when you talk about whether workloads eventually move dynamically from an on-prem data center to the cloud and back and forth, et cetera. The one thing about cloud security that I found was interesting, and Partha Panda, who's a VP with Trend Micro, was telling me this at dinner one time. So the fun part about IT shops is when they can see the infrastructure, they're really good at remembering to patch it. But when it's out in the cloud, oh yeah, we got that server that we have to patch, right? So it's a really good observation about sort of human psychology and culture. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you for your time. If you want to approach me individually, thanks for having me.